Okay, share screen. Everyone's seeing this is my Windows screen. Everybody seeing that? Hello
Yes.
there.
Yes,
Okay.
Yep.
yes.
So why am I using Windows if I'm talking about Linux? Well, we speak very many languages to help our clients. So I still have Windows. I use Linux, and I also have a Mac that I use. So I try to keep up with the big three, if you will. So let me open my slides. So is Linux right for me? Well, there's one big use case that I like, and that's if you still use Windows 10, that has become non-supported, as you probably know, unless you paid for the extra year support, which will, I guess, expire in November of this year or October, one of the two. So at that point, Windows 10 will be even more risky to use. So the best use of thinking about something called Linux is to put that on the old Windows 10 machine and still be able to use that hardware without taking it to the recycling place. Now, in some cases, if you're thinking about getting a new PC, now this is Daryl's opinion. I don't like Windows anymore. I used to be, a Windows advocate. I really used Windows throughout my work career. But Windows and Microsoft has gotten to a point that I don't like it for seniors for several reasons. And one of those is something called OneDrive, which causes us all kinds of questions and support issues. And it's the whole idea of all the information that's available to Microsoft when you start using their their operating system and applications. Some people like a little more privacy. So that's just my opinion. So I use the term, what is an operating system? Well, you've heard of Windows, you've heard of Mac OS, you may have heard of Chrome OS. That's what they use on Chromebooks. And what I'll be talking primarily today is something called Linux. So, and these are the most popular desktop operating systems that all of us use. By far, of course, Windows has the most number of users throughout the world. Mac OS is probably second. Linux, though, is gaining popularity. I just read recently where the French government in France, they've dictated that all their government employees, 2.5 million people, will be using Linux instead of Windows. So what an operating system does, so an operating is system, think of it as a manager of your computer. It's like the traffic director that this graphic is trying to show. So it allows the computer to be booted up. It allows you to open programs. It allows you to save files. It connects you to the internet. It just keeps everything running. So that's at the heart of what keeps a computer working for you. Think of an operating system, think of computers as having layers like a sandwich metaphor. So at the very bottom, you have your hardware, the keyboard, the screen, the memory, the storage. A layer above that, you have the operating system. And then the operating system is what's used to talk to your apps, your printers, like I said earlier, keeps everything running and connects all the pieces together. Now, when is Linux a good choice? Now, here's an example. AI let me down. I used artificial intelligence to create this graphic, and it came out not exactly as I wanted. And I just recently noticed that. So, my point is, I don't want you to buy a new PC. I want you to think about saving your old PC without having to take it to the recycle place. If you have an old Windows 10 or a 7 machine, we can load the Linux operating system on that machine, and that lets you keep the hardware for as long as it will last. Now, if it's already old hardware, like I was talking earlier, it's not going to fix hardware problems necessarily. but it will probably allow you to extend the life of that hardware. Now, Linux is not Windows, so the applications are not exactly the same. They have to be Linux applications to work, but there usually is an equivalent application for most every application type of thing you use on Windows. And to be honest, most of what we users do today is through the web using a web browser. So that makes it even easier to transition to Linux because a lot of applications now are web-based and they're not installed locally as an application on your PC. So what is Linux? Well, it's free. It's a free operating system. It's considered to be very safe and reliable, and it's great for everyday tasks. So if you typically use Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook, it runs all those type of email applications because they are cloud-based. So you can use a web browser to access things like Gmail, Yahoo Mail, Outlook, and so on. And it supports all the popular browsers such as Firefox, Brave, Chrome, Edge, and so on. Now, a lot of us use Photos. It has applications that do photo management. Again, not Windows-based, not what you would use on a Mac, but specific applications that have been written for Linux. You can make video calls such as Zoom, Google Meet, and so on. And you can create documents, spreadsheets using one of the tools is called LibreOffice, and that's very similar to Microsoft Office. And that is a package that you actually install on your machine. It creates the documents and they are stored locally on your machine versus cloud solutions such as Google Docs or Office 365 online. So a lot of my documents and spreadsheets and so on, I use Google Docs to create that because I am cross platform. So I have Windows, Mac, and Linux machine. So if I use Google Docs and Google Spreadsheets, well, they're available to me on any device I use. And I have converted several of us to Linux, and after a little training, they find it simple and easy to use. It is more secure, in my opinion, than Windows is, and it doesn't slow down on old hardware. So if you've got a Windows machine today that takes 10 minutes to boot up, takes, 2 minutes to open an application, all of that is going to be improved by you putting Linux on it. So Linux has layers, and it starts with something called the Linux kernel. Now, there is a school of, well, there's several people that point out that Linux truly is just the kernel, and it's not everything that you see in front of you. I'll get into a little more detail in a minute. You have your operating system tools, file management, settings, updates. Then we have what's called the desktop environment, which in a minute I'll show you that is far more choices available than either Windows or Mac. So one of the things that's an advantage of Linux, it's very customizable. So you can change the look and feel a lot more than you can on Windows or a Mac. Then you have the application layer, the browser, your email, and Office apps. So we have in Linux, we have what's called a distribution. So you have a distribution consists of the Linux kernel, tools, desktop environment, apps, and updates. So examples, and these are the three desktop environments, desktop distributions that I favor for seniors. So there's the big three in my mind for seniors are Ubuntu, Linux Mint, or something called Zorin. And after using all three over the years, I came to Zorin most recently, and I find it, in my opinion, it's the best suited for transitioning from Windows to Linux. That's not to say Ubuntu, Linux Mint are bad. They are very good desktop environments or distributions. But in my opinion, Zorin is the easiest to use. Now, There are hundreds, literally, of different desktop distributions in Linux. There's a website called distroc.com, which you can actually go to this website and pick one of these distributions, and it allows you to run it from the web. It doesn't install anything locally on your machine, so you can get an idea of what that particular distribution looks like to use. So here you see Linux Mint, and you have Ubuntu coming up, I think. Anyway, you can test drive these various distributions without having to ever touch your machine and make changes to your machine. So what is a desktop environment? Well, it puts it all together. It gives you the menu, the taskbar, the icons, the Windows style. So again, as I mentioned, Zorn is a simple one and simple desktop environment, in my opinion. But there's other desktop environments within Linux. One of them is GNOME, KDE Plasma, XFCE, and that's designed for really old computers, so it's a lot lighter weight to impact your hardware. A distribution can use different desktop environments. So even if you get Ubuntu, you can change the desktop environment within it. So it's like I said, it's very customizable, which is a bonus, but it's also challenging because, like you saw on that DistroSeed, there's so many choices of different desktop distributions in desktop environments. That's why I kind of said, in my opinion, for us seniors, there's really only three that I think you should look at. So why do users, seniors in particular, like Linux once they get it and are using it? Well, it's free to use. You don't have to pay for Linux. You don't have to pay for the applications. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that, but in general, all the applications and the operating system are free. And this is a big one. In Windows, you may know all of a sudden an update comes along that literally can take hours to do on your machine that you have no control of using your machine. The updates in Linux are very not unobtrusive. They happen in the background. They never force you to restart. They say, okay, the next time you restart, this will complete the install, but you don't have to restart. Linux is very secure. Again, it works well on older computers. It has simple, clean menus. As you see when I do a demo, it really goes back to like Windows 7 type days or even XP type days as being a much easier interface, in my opinion, to work with. As I mentioned, it's easy to update, and you don't have as much advertising, a lot of pop-ups coming from Windows constantly trying to get you to buy something that you just looked at on the internet. So in my opinion, again, Zorin OS is especially user-friendly. So let's take a look at that. So I'm running Windows here, but one of the technologies available to us is virtualization, VM machines. So as a virtual machine that runs underneath Windows, I have installed Linux Zorin. So this is a guest operating system that's running underneath Windows. So I'm sharing memory from my Windows machine to run this. So this is the basic Zorin interface. So like Windows, this Z icon over here is enables the start menu, and it lists all the different applications that are available. Um, an interesting point, as you'll see on my area down here, I have a lot of things labeled like Gmail here. Well, that's actually a web-based app. I use the Edge browser, so I can actually create a web page and turn it into what appears to be an application. So that's an interesting feature of Edge and of Linux that allows us to take a totally web-based application and make it appear to being used as an installed application. If I go over here on the right side and click home, that takes me to where all my files and documents are, the different things I'm connected to. Zorin gives me the ability to actually connect. I use the Google Workspace environment, so I can make a connection and see all the files and folders from my Google environment right here in the File Explorer. So if I want to look at something like all the Office apps, so I mentioned earlier LibreOffice. So this is a set of tools that come free with Linux installs that are very similar to using Microsoft Office. They all work with Microsoft documents or spreadsheets. You can edit them and save them in Microsoft format, or you can save as a PDF, or you can save as their own proprietary format. So again, those are all free tools that come with most Linux distributions. So under Internet, we have the different explorers. Interestingly enough, Zorin now comes by default and with the Brave web browser. Now, I didn't use Brave. I installed separately the Edge browser. You see something here called Thunderbird. That's a application that works with different email systems. So I use Gmail. I can either read my Gmail by using the web browser, or I can open up this Thunderbird application and it allows me to read my different email systems from Gmail or Yahoo or Outlook. Now down on the bottom here, this area is called the dock. I think Mac calls it a dock also. Windows calls it the taskbar. So regardless, this is a quick launch area for your common applications. So like other systems, applications that I frequently use, such as Edge, Gmail, Google Docs, Google Drive, LibreOffice, so on and so on, they can be what is called pinned, P-I-N, pinned to the shelf, so it allows me to have quick access. The settings area is very similar to other operating systems. So all your settings, you go to the settings app, and that allows you to make changes to the settings and the look and feel. If I right click, similar to Windows, you get choices such as changing the background, working with the display settings, and so on. So if I wanted to change the background, I could just click it. Well, that's an interesting one. No Windows, yes Linux. So you can customize a lot of different things, like I said, within Linux. So the other really interesting thing in terms of customization, this interface I likened and claim that it's very similar to Windows 7 as an example. But if I click this tool or this application called Appearance, Zorin Appearance, within Zorin, I can actually change the entire interface so that all of a sudden now, oh, what does this do when I click on it? Well, it launches into an interface that I think is more Mac-like. So if you actually come from an old Mac, and I don't think I mentioned this, you can install Linux on a older Macintosh computer, Apple computer. So you might like this interface more than the Windows type interface. So to the point, this is very customizable. So go back to that one. So that's the basic look and feel of Linux, of Zorin that I installed again as a virtual machine. But this is what I'm um, saying could be installed on an old Windows type machine. Any questions while I'm here on the interface?
So Gerald, Effie here, um, I'm confused. Do you totally wipe the Windows off the machine before you put on Linux? Or,
This is not a straightforward answer. So what I did here, no, Windows is preserved.
yeah,
But if I take your old Windows 10 machine, you basically have three choices. I can totally wipe off Windows and install only Linux. You could try to run Linux as I'm doing as a virtual machine, but I should point out that older machines probably don't either support virtualization or they don't have the memory and resources to do it. So this is a task management of my window or my Linux session. And notice that I'm only using 2.5 GB of memory. Now, if you look at a typical Windows machine and see what is running just to use Windows, it's a lot more than that. So Linux is very light on its impact to your computer hardware. But again, I'm running as a virtual machine, so you could try that on an old machine. I don't think it would work. The other option that we show people, let's say you just want to see if it'll work on your machine. So what we do is we boot Linux from what they call a USB stick. I put what's called a ISO file on there. I boot it into that ISO file on the USB stick. And Linux is actually only running from that USB stick. So that gives you an idea, is it going to work on a machine? Do I like the look and feel? And then I can do a full install when we actually wipe out the what's on the Windows. Now there's another thing called dual booting. So you can actually still retain Windows and also boot into Linux separately. I don't recommend that for normal, when I'll say normal users, because all of a sudden Windows comes along with an update and just destroys that dual boot setup. And we have to do some kind of low level changes to make it work again. So I've seen that happen too often. I don't recommend dual booting. Um, does that answer your question, Debbie?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
I like the chance of being able to see what they call the live boot because that really gives you, is it going to work with this existing hardware? And often we'll say, well, it doesn't work on every machine.
I like that too. I think that would be certainly something I'd want to look at because I have a Windows 7 machine also. So I have a Windows 7, a Windows 10, well, on the extended 10, and then my XP desktop. So I would definitely want to look at this. And I guess if I choose not to go on to 11, although Sarah Jane's pushing, um, and this machine, my Windows 10 machine, supposedly will handle it. I would want to see if it was possible to do that the way you're running it, or be able to put a stick in and use it like, and I don't know whether that's possible. Do you back up to that stick then, as if you've done it?
Well, the live running it from the stick,
Uh,
when you shut down, you throw everything away.
you do. Okay. Okay. That
Now, there
I
are
understand.
some sticks that can be configured that are called persistent, and they do allow you to save settings. I have not been overly successful in making that work, but
Okay.
supposedly it can be done.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm definitely interested in this, certainly for my 7, because it's a nice desktop. And like Evie, I have the availability of watching CDs on it. And that doesn't come with a lot of the machines and new ones anymore.
Well, no, I think that's a good idea, but also consider you can buy an external CD, a DVD player, and they're not that expensive.
That's true. You know me, Daryl, I'm hard to get rid of things.
You're is the term frugal?
Yes,
Uh,
extremely.
okay.
Yep. That's why I'm where I am, I think, frankly. But yes, I am. To me it's perfectly good. Why am I throwing it out?
All right. So I'm on our website. What I wanted to show here, and this is Longmont SCT, sctc.org. is we have tabs here at the top, one of which is Linux. So here's a link to the slides I've been showing if you want to go back later and watch those. I will post the link here for the YouTube video, but I also have that linked on our homepage, just on our entire YouTube channel. And in the past, I've posted some other things about tips and tricks. What is Linux? Linux terminal. Now, I didn't mention the terminal. In the old days of Linux, you basically did everything from a command line level, and that's available on Windows and even a Mac. The terminal on Windows is usually called the command terminal or PowerShell. I think it's called terminal on the Mac. So not very knowledgeable people can do interesting and troubleshooting type things on the terminal. But the idea of more modern Linux is to keep the average user from ever needing to use that terminal interface to do anything. And I really think over the 4 or 5 last years, Linux has done a really good job at doing that. So that's our website. I'm going to go ahead and stop share. That was basically my spiel. Any comments, questions? Evie, you think you'll be considering this? It sounds like Linda may be.
Yeah, I definitely will be.
And again, we could do it in a non-destructive manner. We don't have to destroy your current setup to give you an idea what this would look like.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
That's great, Gerald. That's really helpful. Yeah.
I think I'm gonna
Yeah, I
stop.